On April 13, 2011, the vigilant neighbors of the Dupont-Diligone family began to worry. For about a week, there had been no usual noise behind the wall. For a family of 6 and 2 large dogs, this was extremely strange. The police who arrived on the scene found nothing suspicious. There were no signs of a crime. The gendarmes of the French city of Nantes decided that the family had simply gone on vacation. However, over the next week, the police returned to the luxurious apartment several more times at the insistence of relatives of the family. Finally, on April 21st of that year, the police reported a crime that shook the quiet town. Almost the entire family was dead, and the only suspect was its head, who disappeared without a trace. Xavier Dupont-Diligone came from an old French aristocratic family and was born in 1961. As a young man, he traveled a lot and met Agnès, a girl from a wealthy family. The couple began a relationship, but Xavier wasn't ready to settle down yet. When he decided to return to Agnès, she was already expecting a child with another man. This did not stop Xavier, and he married her in 1992, a rather unusual act by the standards of the French aristocracy. The young family moved to several cities in France in the early 2000s and planned to settle in the United States. However, something went wrong, and their plans not only derailed, but also seriously depleted the family budget. Career Xavier did not add up. He tried himself in various businesses, but without much success. Financial support for the family provided his wife, Agnès, whose parents left her a solid inheritance. After the failure of emigration to the United States, the family decided to settle in Nantes in western France. They bought an apartment in a prestigious neighborhood and began a quiet life at the beginning of the new millennium. By then, Xavier and Agnès had 4 children, Benoit and Thomas, and adopted son Arthur. They were last seen in their entirety on April 3, 2011, when they had dinner at a local restaurant. There was nothing suspicious in their behavior. On April 11th, the family's relatives received a strange letter purportedly from Xavier, although it was unsigned. The letter also contained grammatical errors, which was uncharacteristic of him. The message stated that Xavier was an undercover agent for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, and that he and his family were going to the United States under the Witness Protection Program. This meant that all ties to relatives would be severed, and their family would start a new life with new names. The letter also stated that in case of questions from outsiders, they should say that the family had moved to Australia. Teachers at the schools where Xavier and Agnès' children attended were also informed of their departure to Australia. This caused concern among the relatives. They were greatly surprised by the content of the letter and were unable to contact Xavier. They eventually asked the police to check on the Dupont-Diligone family, which happened a few days after neighbors called the gendarmes to the same address. In total, the police visited the house 6 times. However, nothing suspicious was found, although minor details, such as the absence of several photographs, drew attention. Some beds had no bedding, and a note for the letter carrier was hanging on the front door, asking him to return all letters and parcels to the senders. The police believed that the family had simply left and did not take seriously the arguments of neighbors who claimed that 6 people with 2 dogs would not fit in the Citroën C5 that Xavier drove. However, rumors of the family's disappearance continued to spread, and on April 21st, police issued a wanted notice for the Dupont-Diligone family. That same day, after another inspection of the house, patrolmen noticed fresh earth under the terrace and began digging. Soon, the whole city of Nantes exploded with the news of a crime against an entire family. In the garden behind the house, in one grave, the bodies of Agnès, Anne, Arthur, Benoit, and 2 Labradors were found. Another grave contained the body of Thomas, Xavier's eldest biological son. Forensics showed that they had been killed about 10 days earlier. Police concluded that someone killed Agnès, Arthur, Anne, and Benoit first, so their bodies rested together. They all died from 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head, and some had traces of sleeping pills in their system. Agnès was using an anti-snoring machine that went off around 3 a.m. on April 3rd. She was presumably killed at that time, and then the others. 18-year-old Thomas was killed 1 or 2 days later than Agnès, which explains the 2 graves. None of the neighbors heard the shots, and the perpetrator probably used a silencer. Surprisingly, no traces of blood were found in the apartment, which is highly unusual for a mass murder. Someone carefully hid all traces of the crime. In addition, the police paid attention to an unusual detail. Each family member, wrapped in a blanket and a bag, was found with a small icon. Due to the poor condition of the bodies, no visual inspection was made, and the police formally found 5 bodies, 3 males and 2 females. It seemed obvious to everyone that this was the Dupont-Diligone family, but Xavier's body was never found. The case took a sensational turn. Interviews with eyewitnesses and surveillance footage led detectives to the most gruesome version. The killer was Xavier Dupont-Diligone himself. It was established that he was in his apartment already after his wife, children, and dogs were killed. On April 8th, he sent several emails to family members from a computer in the same apartment. 3 days later, on April 11th, Xavier left Nantes in his car. His route was traced by license plates. Xavier headed southwest, stopped overnight at a hotel in the small town of Blognac, then changed course to the southeast, to the places where he had traveled in his youth. He paid with bank cards, so his movements were easy to track. Xavier was last seen on April 15th. He checked out of another hotel, left his car, and with a backpack went into a mountainous area, at which point his tracks are lost. Police organized a massive search in the area, but nothing has been found in 2 months. Some researchers speculate that Xavier committed suicide, but even in this landscape, his body was bound to be found. Dozens of people with dogs were involved in the search, and aviation was used. Nevertheless, many questions remain about the crime itself. Although Xavier can be considered the main suspect, there are moments that do not fit into this version. The motive for the crime remains unclear. Financial motivation is considered the most likely. People around the Dupont-Diligone family recalled that despite the external prosperity, expensive housing in a prestigious neighborhood, and children's education in private schools and colleges, the family had financial difficulties. Xavier gave the impression of a happy family man who devoted a lot of time to his wife and children. However, in a forum on medicine and psychology, supposedly Agnes wrote about her unhappy life, mentioning her husband's old-fashioned views on family relationships. Xavier was a man who gave out orders, demanding that they be obeyed unconditionally. It also emerged that the gun used to kill his family members belonged to his father, who passed away in January 2011, 4 months before the tragedy. Xavier, while going through his father's belongings, came across the gun and took it with him. He started practicing shooting, got a license to keep guns, and sometimes took his children to the shooting range. But how could an ordinary man with no criminal record so thoroughly dispose of the marks in the apartment? History knows cases when master criminals left evidence, and here in the apartment there was not a hint of a crime against 5 people. Some people strongly disagree with Xavier's theory of guilt. Family lawyer Dupont-Diligone, who represents Xavier's sister and mother, argues that he is innocent because he had no motive. And there are other arguments. The graves were dug deep and in an awkward place. There is just over a meter of space between the ground and the floor of the terrace. And Xavier had serious back problems, and it was hard for him to bear the strain. According to one version, Xavier contacted some people, possibly from the criminal world. This is consistent with the information that he needed money and could have borrowed it from the local mafia, which took revenge by not getting the debt repaid. But there is an inconsistency here as well. It is unlikely that the killers would have slipped sleeping pills and left icons with the bodies. Police also found out that in February 2009, Xavier borrowed 50,000 euros from an old girlfriend under the pretext of business development, but the money was spent on expensive hotels and cover previous debts. There is a weak version of falsification, as there was no visual identification of the bodies. It cannot be stated with 100% certainty that it was members of the Dupont-Diligone family who died, but it seems unlikely. It is unclear why or who would want to do this, unless Xavier really was an undercover agent, as he claimed in the letter. Unfortunately, more arguments point to Xavier's guilt than anything else. Some people in his entourage and those involved in the investigation are convinced that the head of the family misled investigators. He ruined the family and fled, but he did not commit suicide. First, he carefully removed all traces of the crime, invented a legend for relatives and hid the bodies, staying for several days in the house where the murder of his loved ones took place. This requires the cold-bloodedness of a true criminal. He then set out in his personal car to drive around the country, paying with bank cards, getting caught on surveillance cameras, and showing real IDs at hotels. It was as if he purposely wanted the police on his trail and then went off into the wilderness with a backpack and a case for a long object, such as a rifle. Logically, the first thought would be that he had committed suicide. However, the mountainous area where he disappeared is about 130 kilometers from Marseille, a major port from where cargo ships depart to various countries, including distant ones. No one reported to the police that they had given a ride to a man resembling Xavier, who was a wanted man. In 2015, the French press received a mysterious letter with a photo of Thomas and Benoit Dupont-Diligone. On the back it read, "I am still alive. From that time until this hour." The signature was Xavier Dupont-Diligone. The photo was handed over to the police. The expert's report was not disclosed, but it is possible that it was a forgery. In 10 years, the police received more than 900 reports from people who claimed to have seen Xavier. In October 2019, it seemed the suspect had finally been found. At Glasgow Airport, police detained a man who had arrived on a flight from Paris, but after a thorough fingerprint and DNA check, the man was released. He was a native of Portugal living in France. This crime is still unsolved. Xavier Dupont-Diligone remains internationally wanted as a suspect. None of the hundreds of reports from people who allegedly saw a man resembling Xavier have been confirmed. Don't miss the other shocking stories. Follow the link and subscribe to the channel and share your comments.